My name is Jack. I'm 35 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed I had won the lottery in love. I met Laura when I was a junior in college. She was quiet, a bit awkward in social settings, but she had a warmth in her smile that melted right through me. We met in a writing seminar, the kind where you're forced to share personal essays with strangers. Hers was about her late father, raw, unfiltered grief, and I still remember thinking, this woman has soul. I walked up to her after class, said something stupid about her bravery, and she just blushed. That's how it began. We dated for 2 years before tying the knot. Neither of us had been with anyone else. That may sound naive or even restrictive in today's world, but to us, it felt special, like we were writing our own love story from page 1. We knew each other's fears, habits, dreams. There were no exes, no emotional baggage. Just the two of us, building something from scratch. Or so I thought. The first few years of marriage were bliss. Quiet, simple, full of little rituals, Sunday pancakes, movie marathons, late-night walks. We were that couple people pointed to and said, they've got it figured out. But comfort, I've learned, can sometimes be a blindfold. You think you're safe because you're not fighting. You think you're secure because you've got history. But history means nothing when someone starts writing a new chapter without you. The change began when Laura started a new job. She had been working from home since college, freelancing in design, but when a new marketing firm opened a branch downtown, she jumped at the offer. I was proud of her, genuinely. She'd always been introverted, hesitant to throw herself into new environments, and this job seemed like a big step forward. At first, she struggled to fit in. I remember her coming home quiet, withdrawn. I told her to give it time, encouraged her to go out to those after-work drinks, to say yes when her co-workers invited her along. I didn't want to be that husband, the controlling one, the jealous one. I trusted her. Completely. That trust would become my undoing. After a few weeks, I noticed changes. Subtle at first. Laura started staying out later. She used to call me on her way home, just to chat, nothing big, but that stopped. Then came the wardrobe changes. Tighter dresses. More makeup. Again, I didn't want to seem suspicious, so I said nothing. But inside, a small knot began to form in my gut. Then there were the names. Sarah, Tanya, Megan. These were the women she started hanging out with. Co-workers who, from what I gathered, were either divorced, dating casually, or proudly single. Their conversations, which she shared in passing, were filled with stories of Tinder hookups, bachelorette weekends in Vegas, empowered choices, and not being tied down. I smiled when she told me about them. But in private, I was disturbed. Laura had never spoken this way before. Soon, the nights out became more frequent. The wine bottles in the recycling bin multiplied. Our weekends, once reserved for brunch and errands, became days I spent alone, while she nursed hangovers or went out again. And intimacy? That faded like the sound of a song you once loved but hadn't heard in years. She stopped initiating, and when I did, I was often met with, I'm tired, or not tonight. One night, she came home late, cheeks flushed, laughing to herself. She poured a glass of wine, sat on the edge of our bed, and casually mentioned a new manager at her office, Kevin. Said he was sharp, confident, a problem solver. I listened, interested, until I realized she'd been talking about him for almost 10 minutes. That night, something shifted in me. A chill, like someone opened a door in the middle of winter. The days that followed were filled with offhand comments about how Kevin handled stress well, or knew how to lead a team. I tried brushing it off, but I wasn't blind. I asked her, gently, if she admired him a little too much. She rolled her eyes, said I was being paranoid. That night, when I kissed her goodnight, she turned her face. I laid awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was how it started, the unraveling. The moment that cracked me came a week later. We were having dinner. Pasta, wine, soft music in the background. Laura set her fork down and asked, do you ever regret only being with me? The question hit like a sucker punch. I stared at her, unsure how to respond. She clarified, I mean, don't you ever wonder what it would have been like to be with other women? I swallowed. No, I said, you've always been enough for me. She looked down then, just for a second. But I saw something, a flicker of sadness, regret, maybe guilt. She quickly changed the subject, but the damage was done. That question haunted me for days. And then, a few nights later, she brought it up, open marriage. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it sounded so absurd coming from her. Laura had never been that person. Sexually adventurous? No. She used to blush when we passed lingerie stores. But now she wanted to explore, to see what we were missing. She said she didn't want to lose me, that this would make us stronger. I wish I had walked away that night. But instead, I said yes. Because I loved her. Because I was naive. Because I had no idea just how much it would cost me. Agreeing to the open marriage was like opening a door to a place I'd never imagined stepping into. Unfamiliar, unstable, and unnervingly quiet at first. Laura seemed almost relieved after I agreed. Like she had been holding her breath, waiting for my permission to step over a line she had already approached long ago. We sat down and discussed boundaries. She suggested them, not me. No bringing anyone to the house. No sleeping with mutual friends or co-workers. Full honesty. At the time, I nodded along, not realizing how meaningless those lines would become once crossed. She hit the ground running. I remember the first night she told me she had a date. That was the word she used. Not a fling, not a meetup, but a date. Like this was some high school crush she was chasing. She stood in front of the mirror for nearly an hour, curling her hair, applying makeup she hadn't worn in years. The same woman who used to get embarrassed when I complimented her lingerie was now grinning at her reflection, adjusting her blouse like it was the first day of spring. I asked her where they were going. She gave a vague answer. Wine bar downtown. Said his name was Corey. I didn't ask for more. I couldn't. That night, I sat in our living room, lights off, nursing a beer I didn't even want. The silence was suffocating. Every car that passed, I hoped it was her. Every second that ticked by on the clock above the TV felt like a slap. When she returned, it was past midnight. She smelled like wine and perfume. She slipped out of her heels at the door, tossed her purse on the table, and walked right past me without a word. That became the new normal. Over the next few months, Laura went on dates. Some were one-offs. Others, she admitted, were repeat visits. I didn't ask if she slept with them. I didn't have to. Her body language told me everything. How she avoided my touch, how she kept her phone face down, how she giggled at texts from names I didn't recognize. I was dying a slow death in my own home, and yet, I told myself I had no one to blame but me. She was careful, or thought she was. But I noticed the shift when Kevin, her manager, became a name that resurfaced more and more. At first, she talked about him like she did any colleague. His leadership skills, how he handled pressure, his ideas. But soon it became more. How he dressed, how he laughed, how he got her. I once walked past the bathroom and heard her humming while texting. I glanced down when she left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. Kevin, the last message, last night was amazing. My stomach dropped. When I confronted her, she looked at me blankly. We said we'd be honest, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She bit her lip, then whispered, it just happened. So now she wasn't just dating. She was in a relationship with the same man I had expressed concern about months earlier. And still, she played it off like this was all fair, that I had agreed, that I had signed up for this heartbreak. And what was I doing during this circus of betrayal? I tried to date too. At first, just to balance things. To convince myself I wasn't the pathetic husband waiting at home while his wife played out her fantasies. I went on a few coffee dates, even matched with a woman named Denise. But every time things got even mildly intimate, I felt like I was cheating. Not on my wife, ironically, but on who I used to be. The man who believed in loyalty, in exclusivity, in building something sacred. Then came Mina. I met her at a friend's birthday dinner. She had just moved from South Korea, smart, confident, with a calm presence that felt like a balm to my raw nerves. We got to talking. No pressure, no expectations. Just honesty. The kind I hadn't felt in years. I found myself smiling again. Laughing. Feeling seen. After a few weeks of text messages and walks in the park, we kissed. It felt like breathing after being underwater too long. And when things eventually turned physical, I was stunned at how different it felt. How loved I felt. Not used, not tolerated. Desired. Laura noticed. At first, she teased me. Look who's finally enjoying the open life, she'd say with a smirk. But then she started to ask questions. Where I was going. Who I was seeing. She'd text me during my evenings out. Once, she even waited up for me. That had never happened before. And when I got home after a night with Mina, she was sitting on the couch, her arms crossed, eyes puffy. She didn't speak, just stared at me like I was the one who had betrayed her. And that's when I realized the game had changed. She wanted freedom. I gave it to her. But now that I had found happiness in someone else's arms, it suddenly wasn't fun anymore. Not for her, and not for me either. Because with every step I took toward healing, I was reminded of how far we'd fallen and how much I had lost. The more I gave into the arrangement, the more I began to see how broken everything truly was. The idea of an open marriage, a concept I never believed in to begin with, had turned into a slow, agonizing poison. It didn't just change the dynamics between Laura and me. It changed the very foundation of who we were, or thought we were. Laura, in her newfound freedom, kept up her escapades like it was a second job. Most weekends, she'd be out with the girls or a friend from the office, which, by then, was just code for her affair with Kevin. I didn't even ask anymore. What was the point? The rules we had created, no bringing anyone into our home, full honesty, emotional distance, had been shattered so early that they may as well have never existed. It was chaos with lipstick and perfume, dressed up as liberation. At some point, I started to feel like a ghost in my own house. I'd come home and find traces of her absence everywhere. A half-empty wine glass, the faint scent of a different cologne in the hallway, lipstick-stained napkins in the trash. She didn't even bother hiding it. And maybe, in her mind, she didn't have to. After all, I had agreed to this madness, hadn't I? But while she was chasing some reckless version of herself, I found something very different. Mina. Mina was nothing like Laura. She didn't flirt for attention. She didn't post half-dressed photos or throw around terms like exploration or empowerment. She was grounded, soft-spoken, and yet, behind her gentle voice was a sharp wit and a kind of strength that surprised me. We didn't meet through apps or setups. It was random, a shared moment at a bookstore, of all places, when we both reached for the same copy of a Murakami novel. From that moment, things just flowed. Our first conversations weren't about relationships or sex or what we were looking for. We talked about travel, about food, about the loneliness that comes from being in a crowded room and still feeling invisible. She understood. She listened, really listened, and not once did I feel judged or rushed. The first time she touched my hand, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, warmth. When we finally crossed that line, when our connection turned physical, it wasn't lust. It wasn't revenge. It was healing. I didn't know that intimacy could feel like this. Safe, connected, real. She didn't try to dominate me or seduce me into forgetting my pain. She simply saw me, the broken man behind the polite smiles. And she accepted him. I never told Laura the details, but she noticed the difference immediately. I wasn't bitter anymore. I wasn't begging for her attention or asking who she was texting. I stopped caring, and that terrified her. She started coming home early, unannounced. Once, she showed up to my office with lunch, something she hadn't done in years. She cooked dinner, cleaned the house, even lit candles like we were newlyweds again. She began initiating intimacy, slipping into our bed wearing lingerie I hadn't seen since our honeymoon. But it was too late. I could barely bring myself to touch her. When I did, it felt mechanical, like completing a chore out of obligation. The spark, whatever remained, was gone. One night, after she tried to kiss me and I gently pulled away, she sat up in bed and stared at me. "What happened to us?" she whispered. I looked at her, expressionless. "You tell me." She flinched at that. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly turned away, pulling the blanket over her shoulders. I didn't comfort her. I didn't reach out. I just laid there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long we'd pretend this could be fixed. The following evening, she sat me down in the kitchen and said she wanted to close the marriage. Just like that. As if we could undo everything with a simple request. She told me she regretted it all. The open arrangement, Kevin, the endless nights away from home. She wanted us to be normal again. I asked her one question. Why now? She hesitated. Because I see what it's done to us. Because I miss you. Because I was wrong. I laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. What about your friends? Your adventures? Kevin, are those regrets too? She didn't answer. She just stared down at the table, tears dropping onto her hands. I realized in that moment that she wasn't crying because she missed me. She was crying because she was losing control. The rules had shifted. She wanted to explore, but she didn't expect me to find something better. someone better. And now that I had, she couldn't handle the weight of what she'd unleashed. I didn't say anything else that night. I just got up, walked past her, and closed the bedroom door behind me. Because I knew, no matter what she said from here on out, we had already crossed a line there was no coming back from. Laura's sudden shift was jarring. One moment she was a woman obsessed with freedom, pouring herself into flings and flirtations, and the next, she was playing the doting wife, cooking my favorite meals, folding laundry with care, and even humming while she wiped down the counters. If I hadn't seen the damage she'd caused firsthand, I might have believed her act. But I knew better now. I'd seen too much, felt too much. Her guilt wasn't subtle. It clung to her like a fog, filling every room she entered. She became overly attentive, even affectionate. She brought me coffee in bed, asked how my day was, tried to touch me at every chance. Light brushes of her fingers, playful nudges on the couch, kisses that hovered too long without landing. I barely responded, and when I did, it wasn't warmth she received. It was silence, indifference, because something in me had died. The man I used to be, the one who chased her around the kitchen for kisses, who watched her sleep like she held the meaning of life. He was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone who had learned to survive without her love. One night, she tried to seduce me. She wore the same black silk slip she had on during our honeymoon. The lights were dim, jazz playing in the background. She leaned into me, her voice low, sultry. But the moment she touched me, something inside recoiled. I saw flashes, her giggling with Kevin, checking her phone while we were in bed, slipping out the door for another girl's night. I pulled away, gently but firmly. She froze. "What's wrong?" she asked, barely above a whisper. I looked her in the eye. "Why are you doing this now?" Her lips parted, but she didn't answer. Just stared at me, wounded, as if she couldn't understand how the man she had walked all over was no longer begging for scraps of attention. "You opened the door," I said, standing up. "Now you want to close it because you don't like what's on the other side?" "I just want my husband back," she murmured. "That husband doesn't exist anymore." The next morning, she made a big breakfast: pancakes, bacon, fruit, fresh squeezed orange juice. I didn't touch a thing. She sat across from me, nervously twirling her fork. Finally, she said she wanted to talk, said she needed to be honest. "I want to close the marriage," she said, her eyes trembling. Everything we did, was a mistake. I see it now. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at her, watching the desperation tighten around her like a noose. "Why now?" I asked again, voice steady. "Because I feel like I lost you," she said. "Because I see what it's done to us. Because I realize now, none of it was worth it." I leaned back in my chair and let out a hollow laugh. "So Kevin didn't work out, and now you want the safety net back?" Her face crumpled. "It wasn't just Kevin." "No," I interrupted. "But he was the one I warned you about, wasn't he?" She started to cry then, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. I watched her fall apart. The same way she watched me unravel in silence all those nights I waited for her to come home from some stranger's bed. That evening, I went to see Mina. She greeted me with a smile that didn't feel forced, with arms that wrapped around me like home. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. She knew something had shifted, that I was carrying weight I hadn't let go of yet. She just listened. She always listened. We spent the night together, not just physically, but emotionally. She held me as I stared at the ceiling, quietly battling the war inside my chest. Part of me felt guilt for loving someone else while still being legally married. But a bigger part felt peace, the kind of peace that only comes when you're seen for who you are and loved anyway. When I got home the next day, Laura was waiting. She'd cleaned the house from top to bottom. Fresh flowers on the table, the scent of cookies in the air. She stood there in the kitchen like a scene from the past, like a memory trying to come back to life. "I want to make this right," she said. "I'll do anything, Jack." I looked at her, truly looked, and for the first time, I saw the cracks. The regret. The panic. But it wasn't enough. Regret doesn't unbreak trust. Panic doesn't rebuild love. "You can't undo what's been done," I said softly. She stepped closer. "But I can try. I can change." I shook my head. "You already changed, Laura. That's the problem." And I walked away, leaving her standing there, shaking, pleading with eyes that once made me weak, but now only reminded me of everything we lost. A week after Laura begged to close our marriage, she suggested counseling. At first, I thought it was another performance, another attempt to control the narrative. But part of me, the part that once stood in front of a church altar and said vows with trembling hands, said yes. Not because I thought it would save us, but because I needed to hear the truth from her lips. No more vague apologies. No more silent guilt. Our first session with the therapist was quiet, awkward. Laura fidgeted with her wedding ring while I sat there with my arms folded, trying to keep my rage contained behind a wall of silence. The counselor was a calm woman, middle-aged, direct but kind. She asked us why we were there. Laura went first. She spilled everything in one long, choked confession. How her new friends at work planted the idea of missing out. How their stories of wild nights and reckless love made her feel suffocated by a life she once swore she wanted. How Kevin, the man I had warned her about, validated those feelings. How he encouraged her to live freely, to embrace the woman she'd never been. Her voice trembled when she admitted it started as emotional. It wasn't physical at first, she whispered, but I was already gone. She said the guilt came in waves, but she silenced it with mantras like, "We agreed. It's normal. This is my time." The therapist asked her what made her finally stop. She looked at me. "Him," she said. "He changed." I raised an eyebrow. "Changed?" She nodded. He started smiling again, laughing, getting dressed up, checking his phone with that sparkle in his eyes. That used to be for me. She wasn't wrong. Mina had given me something Laura hadn't in years, a sense of worth, of being wanted. It didn't feel like a rebound. It felt like rediscovery. I thought he'd be miserable, Laura admitted. I thought he'd just wait until I came back. The therapist leaned forward. "So you never considered that he might find love too?" Laura broke. "No," she whispered. "I didn't think he could. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt sick." The therapist asked if there was anything else she hadn't confessed. Laura hesitated. I could see it, the way her jaw tightened, how her fingers gripped the edge of the couch. Finally, I pressed. "Tell me everything, Laura. No more half-truths." She lowered her eyes. "Before we officially opened the marriage, Kevin and I, we didn't sleep together. But what? We touched each other, watched each other. It wasn't intercourse," but her voice cracked. I told myself it wasn't cheating. My entire body went cold. Even the therapist looked stunned. "I didn't know how to stop," Laura sobbed. "I was drunk on it, on the attention, on the thrill. But when I saw him talk to another woman the way he used to talk to me, it all shattered." It got worse. She overheard Kevin talking about her to a male colleague. She had passed by his office late one night after a meeting. She stopped when she heard her name. He laughed and said, "You can't trust the quiet ones." When asked if he had feelings for her, Kevin replied, "She was a distraction. That's all. I'm marrying someone real." Then he added, "I feel bad for her husband. But hey, snooze you lose." Laura said she barely made it to her car before vomiting in the parking lot. "I thought I was empowered," she whispered, "but I was just easy." She looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize, red, swollen, filled with shame. "I murdered our marriage, Jack, and I don't know how to bring it back." I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't have words, but because none of them would have mattered. Nothing I could say would undo what I'd heard. The therapist gently intervened, suggesting we take a break, process what was shared, and consider individual sessions. Laura nodded silently. I did too. As we stepped outside, she reached for my hand. I didn't move. Back in the car, she asked if I still loved her. I stared straight ahead. "I don't even know who you are anymore." She began to cry again, softly this time, like the fight was leaving her bones. But I felt nothing. No hatred. No anger. Just a deep, hollow silence where love used to live. That night, I slept on the couch. Laura didn't try to stop me, because even she knew something irreversible had cracked open between us, and no amount of tears would ever seal it shut again. The morning after our counseling session, I woke up stiff on the couch, my body aching more from emotional exhaustion than the cushions beneath me. I sat there in silence, staring at the blank television screen, waiting for a feeling, any feeling, to return. I didn't hate Laura. I wasn't angry anymore. But that made everything worse. I was numb. And when a marriage turns into indifference, that's when you know it's truly over. Laura tiptoed around me that day. She made breakfast, but I didn't touch it. She tried to talk, but my replies were short, distant. Eventually, She gave up and left the room. That should have been the end of it for the day, but it wasn't. That evening, while I was packing a small overnight bag, I needed space. Her laptop buzzed with a video call. She was in the kitchen. Curiosity got the best of me, and I glanced at the screen. It was one of her old work friends, Tanya, the same group that had encouraged Laura to explore. But Tanya wasn't her usual smug self. She was crying. Loudly. Ugly sobs. I heard my name mentioned and stepped into the room just as Laura picked up the call. Tanya's face appeared, red-eyed and panicked. She ruined me, she said between sobs. It was supposed to be harmless. Laura looked confused. What happened? Tanya confessed. After Laura had resigned, Tanya and Kevin had started their own little affair. But unlike Laura, Tanya had a boyfriend, a serious one. And now she was pregnant. Or thought she was. When she told Kevin, he exploded. Accused her of trying to trap him. Said she was crazy. He blocked her number. Then her boyfriend found the email chain between her and Kevin and left her that same night. Laura sat there in stunned silence. I stood just behind her, arms crossed, watching her world unravel, piece by piece. Tanya, desperate, had called because she thought Laura had saved her marriage and wanted advice. How did you get him back? She asked. Laura didn't respond. She just slowly closed the laptop. I didn't say a word. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. Jack, wait, she called after me. I turned, one foot already out. This isn't how it's supposed to end, she said. Her voice cracked, but I didn't stop. That night, I stayed at my brother's apartment. He offered it to me for free, but I paid him rent anyway. I needed to feel like I was still in control of something. A few days later, we had our second counseling session. I had questions. Hard ones. Was that really the first time anything physical happened with Kevin? I asked. Laura hesitated, then looked down. Please don't make me say it, she whispered. Say it. She broke. Admitted that they had touched each other well before the marriage officially opened. Intimate moments in his office, behind closed doors, hands on skin, but not intercourse. She claimed they didn't go all the way, so it didn't count. I laughed, cold and sharp. It always counted, Laura. You just convinced yourself it didn't. She collapsed on the floor in front of me, sobbing, grabbing at my hands, begging for forgiveness. I didn't pull away, but I didn't comfort her either. I just stared at the woman who used to be my wife, now reduced to a shell of her former self. Then came the worst part. I asked, did you ever love him? She shook her head violently. No, I thought I did. I thought it was love. But it wasn't. It was different. Shallow. He never saw me, not really. Not like you did. Then when did you stop loving me? Her eyes widened. I never stopped. And somehow, that hurt more than anything else. Because how can someone claim to love you while actively destroying everything you built together? She begged me to run away with her. Start over. Move to another city. Leave everything behind. I stared at her in disbelief. That wouldn't be fair to Mina. At the mention of her name, Laura unraveled. She cried harder than I'd ever seen. Shaking, gasping, holding on to me like I was about to vanish into thin air. What does she give you that I don't? She cried. What does she do that I can't? Her voice echoed through the therapist's office like a warning siren. Shrill, frantic, heartbreaking. I didn't answer. Because if she had to ask that now, after everything, then she already knew. The session ended in silence. The counselor, composed as ever, suggested more individual therapy. Said healing might require time apart. Laura nodded through her tears. But I didn't nod. I simply stood up, thanked the therapist, and walked out of the room. And as I stood in the parking lot, staring at the setting sun, I realized something devastating. This wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the end of an illusion I had been clinging to for far too long. I didn't plan on going back to the house, but there were still things I needed, documents, clothes, fragments of the life I used to live. I waited until I was sure Laura wouldn't be home. I needed to avoid another ambush of apologies and desperate hugs. I needed silence. But when I walked in, she was there. She didn't say anything at first. She sat on the living room floor, surrounded by photo albums and framed wedding pictures laid out like pieces of evidence. Her eyes were red, her face pale. She clutched one photo in particular, the two of us on our honeymoon, standing barefoot on the beach, grinning like fools who thought love was enough. When she saw me, she stood up quickly. I didn't expect you yet, she said. I won't be long. I replied, brushing past her. Please, just a minute, she begged. I didn't stop, but I didn't tell her to shut up either. That was permission enough for her to continue. She pulled out her phone and held it out toward me. This came in yesterday. It was a message. From Kevin. Or rather, from a new number, since she had blocked his original one. I read it in silence. You think you're so noble? You think exposing me makes you better? You're just another bitter woman who got used and tossed, and now you're trying to feel powerful by burning it all down. You didn't ruin me. You just proved you were never worth keeping. My jaw clenched, not out of jealousy, but out of disgust, not just for him, but for the version of Laura who ever thought this man was worth the destruction of a marriage. I helped her, she said suddenly. Helped who? Tanya. I gave her everything. Emails, dates, proof. She went scorched earth. Sent it all to HR, to Kevin's fiancée, even to upper management. I wanted to end it for good. And you think that fixes anything? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. No, she said quietly. But it was the only thing I could still control. I got the idea from reading forums, about reclaiming your story, about ending the secrecy, so maybe something good could come from the wreckage. I nodded slightly. It was the right thing to do. But not enough for us, she whispered. I turned away, grabbing my things, stuffing what I needed into a duffel bag. She stood behind me, hands trembling, lips pressed tight. I could feel her unraveling again. I'm going to stop counseling, I said, breaking the silence. Her breath caught. What? What? I'm continuing individual therapy, but marriage counseling isn't helping. I'm not fighting for this anymore, Laura. I don't feel anything when I look at you, and that scares me more than anything else ever could. She stepped closer, voice cracking. But I'm trying. I've changed. I shook my head slowly. You're trying to fix what you destroyed, but some things don't come back. Then her tone shifted. Desperation turning to anger. What does she have that I don't? She shouted suddenly. What does she do for you that I couldn't? Tell me. Her voice echoed through the room. The neighbors probably heard. I stood still for a long moment before answering. She makes me feel like a man again, I said softly. Not a fool. That broke her. She dropped to her knees and sobbed. Loud, uncontrolled, almost animalistic. I didn't rush to her. I didn't kneel beside her like I might have once done. I just watched, quietly, until she composed herself enough to speak again. I gave you everything, she gasped. Whatever you want now. I'll do it. Just say it. I'll be that person. I closed the zipper on my bag and looked at her one last time. If you still don't know what I wanted, after everything we've been through, then it's already over. She didn't follow me as I walked out the door. There was no screaming, no chasing. Just the soft sound of her crying echoing behind me. The final note in the symphony of our collapse. Later that night, I sat alone in my brother's apartment. The silence felt different now, less suffocating, more familiar. I opened one of the albums I'd taken with me. Our wedding photo stared back at me, mocking and bittersweet. We looked so happy, so sure. But the truth is, that photo captured two people who didn't know what was coming, who believed that love alone could weather anything. We were wrong. And sometimes, love doesn't die all at once. Sometimes, it dies slowly. One betrayal, one lie, one night out too late at a time. Until one day, you're just two strangers holding memories instead of hands. And in that moment, I finally understood. You can mourn someone who's still alive. And I was done mourning her. The days that followed blurred together. I didn't return her calls. I didn't respond to her texts. I didn't go back to the house. And the strange thing was, for the first time in months, I felt peace. It wasn't happiness, not yet. But it was quiet. And quiet, after all the chaos, was enough. Mina knew something had changed. I didn't have to tell her. She saw it in the way I spoke less about Laura and more about the future. The way I stopped flinching when someone said the word marriage. The way I started smiling without guilt tugging at the corners. She didn't ask for promises. She didn't press for declarations. She just stayed. She cooked simple meals. She laughed at my stupid jokes. She sat beside me during long silences and never once tried to fill them with apologies that weren't hers to make. And somewhere between those moments, I realized I hadn't just been surviving. I had started to live again. But Laura hadn't stopped. She showed up at the apartment once, unannounced. She stood in the hallway, hair a mess, holding a photo album to her chest like it was a shield. I just want to talk, she whispered. I didn't open the door. Jack, please, she said. It's me. And that was the problem. It was her. The same woman who had looked me in the eye while planning her next affair. The same woman who justified betrayal as freedom, who weaponized guilt, who only remembered her vows when they were all she had left. She slid something under the door, a letter, handwritten. I didn't read it that day. I waited. Maybe I was scared. Maybe I already knew what it said. When I finally opened it, it was exactly what I expected. Pages of regret, confessions, desperate hopes for reconciliation. She wrote that she had quit her job, cut off all her old friends, gone no contact with Kevin. She said she'd spend the rest of her life making it up to me. Said she'd work herself to the bone just to be seen as my wife again. But that was the problem. She wasn't my wife anymore. Not in the way that mattered. And it wasn't just about what she'd done. It was about what she'd taken. She stole my trust, my safety, the way I once looked at her like she was my whole world. And now, even if she spent the rest of her life trying to repair it, I'd never forget the nights she left me alone in a bed we once shared, chasing the attention of a man who never loved her back. A week later, I met with a divorce lawyer. My brother recommended her, sharp, professional, discreet. We sat across a polished table while she walked me through the process. I didn't hesitate. I signed the initial papers before I even left her office. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I felt clarity. That night, I told Mina everything. The letter, the decision, the finality of it all. She listened, quietly, then took my hand in hers. "You don't have to rush anything," she said. But I wasn't rushing. I was finally letting go, not just of Laura, but of the version of myself who allowed love to become submission, who believed that loyalty meant enduring anything, even betrayal, who thought that forgiveness was owed, even when remorse came too late. Laura texted once more after she received the divorce notice. "Is this really what you want?" I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "It's what I need." I haven't heard from her since. They say some people come into your life as blessings and others as lessons. Laura was both. She taught me how fragile love can be when taken for granted, how destructive it is when trust is treated like a disposable luxury, how dangerous it is to believe someone will always be there, no matter what you do. But more than that, she taught me what love isn't. It's not manipulation dressed as passion. It's not freedom that only applies to one side. It's not regret delivered too late. Mina once asked me if I believed in second chances. I told her yes, but not with the same person. And as I stood on the balcony that night, the city lights flickering like stars that had lost their sky, I realized I had finally stepped out of the ruins. Not with rage, not with revenge, but with resolve. Because when someone burns the home you built together to the ground, you don't stand in the ashes hoping it'll rebuild itself. You walk away and start building somewhere new. Looking back, if there's one thing this journey has taught me, it's that love without respect is a ticking clock, beautiful to watch, but always running out of time. We often believe commitment means enduring anything, even betrayal, just to keep the illusion alive. But the truth is, loyalty must be mutual, not blind. I used to think sacrificing my peace to save a marriage was noble. Now I see it was survival disguised as devotion. Life, especially as we grow older, is too short to stay where we're undervalued. To those in long-term relationships, don't confuse history with harmony. If someone truly loves you, they will protect the trust you've built, not gamble it for temporary thrills. Forgiveness is powerful, yes, but it can't function without honesty and change. And above all, never let loneliness make you settle for pain dressed as companionship. Sometimes, letting go isn't failure, it's the beginning of healing. And healing isn't just for the young. It's for all of us, because peace, self-worth, and love that uplifts rather than erodes, those aren't luxuries. They're rights.